Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're out in the Midwest of the U.S. with a very accomplished runner from the 1970s. I'll try to spit out the list of accomplishments, but we'll talk about some of them. Division II cross country and track, multiple All-American. Division I cross country and track, All-American U.S. national cross country team. And there's probably some more stuff, but welcome today, Mark Muggleton. Hi, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, great to talk to you. Let's introduce you from the early age. Do you have any memories of the first time you were ever a competitive athlete?
Oh, yeah. I was a phenomenal Little League baseball player. Of course, I grew up with four big brothers.
Nice.
So to keep up, I played shortstop and batted third. I think I played 7 or 8 years of Little League and then just burned out and went out for track to have fun my 9th grade year.
What was your attitude about competition there in a team sport? I mean, you get the bat and you get your individual statistic, but baseball's very much a team sport.
I started at tight end on a football team the first 2 years, and I also was the point guard all through high school. No one would offer me a scholarship in basketball, and I come from a pretty blue-collar family. My dad was a factory worker. My mom was a school bus driver. I went out for track, but it was more like to hang out with party buddies. Everyone started asking me where I'm going to play football in college about my junior year, and I was 140 pounds. And I just thought that maybe I should run cross country.
Where did you go to high school, and what were your high school accomplishments in cross country and track?
I went to Lewiston Porter High School in Lewiston, New York. It's north of Buffalo, about 25 miles. I grew up on the Niagara River in Lake Ontario. I ran 156 flat. For the 800, I had the school record for decades. I ran 51.9 in the 400. I ran the 400 once because the school record was 52 flat. And I ran 423.2 in the mile my junior year. My senior year at state, I led the New York State Championships to about 100 meters to go, and I finished 4th.
Whoa.
At Sunken Meadow. I didn't have a coach for cross country in high school. I went to a camp at Lehigh University that August, and I replicated their workouts throughout the season and told the coach what we're running today.
Why did you have no coaching?
There was a gentleman that showed up, Gene. He was a school teacher, and apparently he stayed around to get the extra credits or extra dollars. Very nice guy. Knew nothing about cross country. We were the worst team in the league. I won every meet. I think we might have beat LaSalle or a couple other small schools locally, but we really didn't have much of a nucleus for distance running. Our football team at the time was the 8th ranked football team in New York State, and we were a 2A school. That's where the school focus was. But they totally supported me when I went out for cross country.
Well, what did you have for equipment and facilities? What was your track like?
Your track with pebbles about that big. We had one home meet a year where they paint the lines on the track, and the lane number 1 would wash out with the spring waters, and it would be filled in with gravel. It was about 4 inches deep in gravel. So as you came by the starting line each lap, you moved out to lane 2 or 3 because you knew you'd be running in sand. So our track wasn't very good. We had a lot of country behind us. Our home course was a canal, which is actually an extension of Love Canal, and is now officially closed off by the state because of toxins. But we ran our meets back there behind the high school in the woods. We were country bumpkins.
Well, let's talk about that race that you mentioned. What happened at that state championship mile in New York where you had a 100-meter lead?
Year before, I finished second at district, and I was sick. So when I went to states my first year in Binghamton, New York, it had snowed, and there was a backstop about 300 yards out, and I got caught in the pack, and my shoe got kicked off. And since I double knotted my shoe, I couldn't get it back on. So I ran the rest of the race in my sock, finished like 79th or 89th with bruises all over my feet. So I was bound and determined not to let that happen again. So there was a bridge at about a quarter mile, and I think I had about an 80-yard lead at that quarter mile, and I took it up to, it was an uphill mile I went through in 4:38. If I was coached, I would have known to relax a little bit because I had a good kick. But I just ran out of gas. I think the winner ran 15:04 and I ran 15:08. And I stumbled in at fourth, but it got me a scholarship to go to Edinboro.
Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about your identity as an athlete at that point around age 18. You had been an athlete a long time. You had competed and been pretty successful in the wide range of sports. How was your competitive drive, and how did you take when you didn't finish first? How were those experiences?
I was extremely competitive because of my older brothers. My next oldest brother was 5 years older. Let's just say we had a mixed relationship, but he used to chase me around the backyard with a baseball bat. So I got pretty fast. I know if anybody ever said anything to me that was kind of off color, like it got the competitive fire roaring, and I normally never lost.
Right. At what point did you think about university and say, well, I'm going to be a college athlete for sure? I know you weren't sure which sport you were going to get into, but was that always part of your vision?
I got to preface this because I wasn't an A student. I rarely went to school. I passed so I could run. I was in a lot of trouble with the police. I was arrested for burglary when I was 16 and just hanging out with the wrong guys. To get back to that, I had an ultimatum from my parents: find a camp because we're going on vacation and you're not staying home. So I called a basketball camp in Philly called Point 5, sent them a check. They sent it back. I didn't get accepted to go to the basketball camp. So my parents said, you need to go somewhere because we're not leaving you home because you're going to burn the house down. I went to, I think it was Blue Ridge Camp, or it was Lehigh University. And I went there for a week. My running shoes were Chuck Taylor's. That was my thought that I could run in college. I was a good basketball player, but not college level.
How did Edinboro get in touch with you and get on your radar?
Doug Watts called my parents, called me. He stayed in the loop. We went down for a visit. It wasn't a full scholarship, so that was a little bit of a hang-up. It was like a 75% scholarship. But we had to chip in $1,500 or something like that. It was a lot of money for my parents. But they did it because I was the last of the Muggletons, the last of Mohegans at home. So they put me in school. I barely ran that summer. I got all these notes and letters from Watts. People run, oh, they got 600 miles on their belt this summer. Oh, I got 700 miles. It's like I might have 100. I played basketball. I won the city championship that year. My workout was to run to the basketball courts and back home. It was about 2 miles each way. That's all the running I did that summer.
Wow. So you landed at Edinboro, which was to be a very dominant team at the national level, at the state and national level. Who were the characters there? Had you met any of them before? And what were your first impressions?
Well, Dennis Packard was my running idol in high school. He went to Kenmore East High School in Buffalo. I saw him win the mile and 2 mile at conference, or lead meet, I guess they call it, when I was a sophomore. I was just blown away. Dennis is probably the prettiest runner you'll ever see. He's up there with the likes of Sebastian Coe and Mary Decker. Perfect form. And he just floated. And Dennis actually became my roommate my sophomore year, so we've been buddies ever since. Cast of characters like Mark Muggleton. Wow, I could go on for probably 7 podcasts talking about Mark. He's no longer with us. Mark had a very abused life, died from alcoholism. Kevin was the team leader, but probably the most gregarious runner on the team was Jeff Foster. Jeff would put a mental hurt on anybody that ever talked to him. He should have won nationals both year, but Jeff couldn't stop training. The guy would go out for 20-mile runs at night after practice. And Dalvin was a great guy. Dalvin was the exact opposite. He was great athlete, great competitor, but in workouts, he was just like, oh my God, you're killing me, man. And he was always the back of the pack in workouts. So we had, and Henry Winger too. And a lot of people don't know this. Henry had a pacemaker in his heart when he was a teenager.
Wow. No, I didn't know that.
We did intervals out at the golf course. He'd take my pulse rate and say, well, Muggleton, you got to get down to 120 before we do our next rep. Let's take Henry's pulse. And where I'd be beating about 140, Henry was beating at 80. He was at Edinboro, and then he transferred somewhere in West Virginia. I never heard of him again.
Among that group of people, you get there, you're undertrained. Coach Watts is, I don't know if he asked you about what you did all summer, but you got there and you had not been putting the same miles in. What was freshman cross country switch to training in that regimen like?
First day, we ran a 5-mile get together, know the team. Second days, we ran a hilly 8 miles in the morning, and we ran 13 miles in the afternoon. And the first 6 were on the watch. And I had my first pair of training shoes. They were Brooks Villanova's. And I ran my 6 miles about 5th man in 32 minutes. And then I struggled over 7 more miles. I couldn't walk up the stairs to my dorm room for 2 weeks. It was brutal. We had a time trial the next weekend. I finished like 17th. And it was a 5-mile time trial. I ran 29 minutes and change. And then we go down to California, PA, and run a meet. And Dalvin and I finished 1-2.
Wow. Did that surprise you?
No, I knew I could run. I never had mileage like that. We actually got caught back in the pack, and Mark Muggleton was ahead of us, and he said, Dalvin, Muggs, what are you doing back here? And he just plowed the road and took us to the front. He started knocking people down, took us to the front, and then I look up, and Dalvin's 100 yards in front of me. I look back, and nobody's in sight, and we finished 1-2, and then the next weekend was Malone. And we were the alternate team to go to Malone because all the good guys went up to Springbank in Toronto.
Ah, wow. Do you remember that Malone race?
Yeah, I remember being in the pack and working through it and being my first invitational and then busting through a pack at the top of the hill and getting to the top of the hill above the pack at about 2 miles. And Dalvin was the only guy ahead of me, and I was in shock. So he was way out front. He had like 200 meters. And then I just ran in second place the whole way. I got kicked down by the end by IPU.
IUP.
IUP, yeah. Indiana.
Yeah. How was managing the athletics with the academic requirements? You had to stay eligible. How was academics?
It was a rough first year. I got letters from Colgate. I got letters from Army. I got letters from St. John. They didn't want to look at my transcripts. I barely had a 2.0 out of high school. I got through that first semester. It was rough, though. I got enough credits to stay eligible. One, I didn't know what college orientation was, so my first day of college was my first day at Edinboro. I had no idea where my classes were. Somehow got through that. Yeah, I went to school to run. And the irony is that I've been incredibly successful as a businessman after college with a very modest GPA and a very modest education.
Let's talk about that before we get back to the track. Business sense involves thinking, problem solving, personality, working with people, maybe competitiveness. What aspects, either experiences or your personality, you think helped you get a successful career?
And I always told this to my high school athletes. I coached for 11 years. Typically, the smartest kids in the high school run cross country. And I'm not saying that without exception. There are exceptions. But if you look back at my peers from both Arkansas and Edinboro, 9 out of 10 of them are very successful. It's a work ethic.
Right.
When I switched from doing 60 miles a week at Edinboro and going to 100 at Arkansas, talk about work ethic. There was nothing free about going to Arkansas. It was sweat and blood.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't mention work ethic, but that's an interesting thing that we can all get. I kind of want to get to the idea of your attitude as a hyper successful high school student going into this. And then did you have any problem adjusting? How was it working with Coach Watts and the new demands? Did you accept that right away? Did you do everything and just said, I'm doing what Coach says? Or how did that work out for you?
Well, we had structured workouts every day, and quite honestly, he's probably the best college coach that I've been. He's the first guy to use heart rate monitors. He was one of the first guys to tell us about lactic acid and recovery days and, making sure you get your heart rate down on the interval before we do another one. I didn't know any of that. The first month was brutal. I didn't think I was going to make it. And we had a rivalry. Slippery Rock was our number one rival. Indiana was as well, but we didn't run against them every weekend. We ran against Slippery Rock every weekend. They had the indoor track. We'd go up to Fredonia. There'd be a tri-meet with Fredonia, Slippery Rock, and us. And that's how Pete and I became such good friends. But at that time, I knew very little. I just was a follower.
Piece of clay, as they say.
I guess.
Let's just get through some of the accomplishments and what they meant to you and how they felt. Success at the high school level, state level, and then Edinboro had fantastic success as a team, and you had individual success at your years at Edinboro. What were the most meaningful or fondest and proudest accomplishments of that time for you?
Well, my freshman year, I was MVP of the league in track. So I won the mile and the 880. And the 880 came as a shock to me because the top 5 guys had all beaten me. But it was a kicker's race and nobody wanted it. So I busted through the pack with 100 yards to go and finished first. I think I ran 155 low. It was a slow time.
Mm-hmm.
I ran 411 in the mile that day earlier. So I won both of them. That was a big one. I led the D2 Nationals in 1500 to 100 meters to go till Steve Scott beat me. I think Steve said, "Thanks, Muggsy. Nice ride. I'll see you later." But, no, he didn't. But he winked at me, and it was a 3:46 time. It was okay, but getting third at D2s was pretty cool. Winning 2 NAIA titles in cross country. I was a national champion as a freshman, even though I didn't score. I was sixth man. I had such a good 800. George Crunkleton, Howard, and Steve Davis came up to me and said, "You're running a 4x4 this weekend." And I said, "Not in a million years." And they actually said that other guy, they said, "The other white boy is terrible. You're going to need to run this leg." And I ended up running and setting a school record there that we still hold.
3:13, yeah.
3:13.
Yeah.
So I've got a plaque for that. So I'm in the Hall of Fame there.
Yeah. A more recent thing of all these accomplishments, you were inducted into the Edinboro Sports Hall of Fame, right?
I couldn't make the ceremony. We had some health issues, and I was a little paranoid with travel with COVID.
Right.
Yeah, that was nice of them to do that. I was only there 2 years, but, I won 3 conference titles, and I was All-American 3 times.
Yeah, great. Well, we met on the track. I don't know if I'll put in this in the podcast. Nobody needs to hear about me, but I was on the track at least once with you at the PSAC finals in the mile in 77, and you did have a devastating kick. What was your strategy in the mile? Did you look like any other runners?
I just gave it all I could on the last 400 in every race, and I usually ran around 57 seconds. That was my strategy.
While you were at Edinboro, did the idea of a 4-minute mile appear to be in reach while you were at Edinboro?
Well, I was really just starting to understand what that was. Penn relays and meets like that were not in our reach. If I had stayed in Edinboro, that would have been a goal. And when I transferred, that was definitely a goal because I went to Arkansas because Natl O'Shaughnessy was there. And at the time, Natl was the second fastest indoor miler in the world. Tony Waldrop had run 3:54 high, and Natl ran 3:55 flat indoors. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but second place in that mile was an 800 guy named Randy Wilson. Randy got second behind Natl in 4:11.
Huh.
So when Natl ran 3:55, it was all by himself.
Wow.
Yeah, so I thought Arkansas had the things to get me there, and they did.
We'll get right on to Arkansas and how you ended up there. About what were the travel like? How did you guys move around in Edinboro? How big a team was traveling then?
We had no budget. My sophomore year, we went down to West Virginia, and we ran the Charleston Half Marathon as like a training run. And we didn't have a van. So at the very last minute, they were loading mattresses into the dorms with handicap vans, and Watts went up and stole one. And we threw a couple mattresses in the back of the van, and every now and then we'd look up, but we slept on the way down to Charleston. So that was our budget. We had 2 guys to a bed, 4 guys to a room. You turn your back that way, I'll turn my back this way, and I'll see you in the morning. We very, very, very little budget. He asked us when we went down to the Dogwood Relays in the spring, he asked us to write home and see if our parents would chip in money for the travel funds.
That's a great story. Roaring success at Edinboro, national championships, All-American. What was the connection that got you interested or available to Arkansas?
Well, I had 4 full ride offers, and one of them was Clemson, one was Western Kentucky, the other was St. John's. I didn't want to go to New York City. Clemson were the first ones to offer me a full ride, and they flew me in, and I verbally committed. Never heard from them. Their coach was a shot putter.
Huh.
He said, "I ride the golf cart alongside you guys," and I talked to them. I got put up with some of the Princeton guys, and there just wasn't a rapport there. I found that they were a little standoffish, and I just didn't feel like it was a fit. But I'd verbally committed and said, "I'll work through this." I got a year red shirt to work through this. John McDonald called me every 3 or 4 days. He used to go down to Tyson Chicken because he got a free phone line for long distance. He called me twice a week, all summer. Told me how good I could be and how he really wanted me. So when it came to August, I drove a 1971 Dodge Charger. I drove to Arkansas sight unseen. He offered me a little bit of money to pay. He paid me to drive the van to all the meets. And since I was a red shirt and I was affiliated with New York AC that year, I got to run the open mile at Texas and Drake. I ran a lot of big meets, and then I ran for New York Athletic Club in that fall at the post-NCAA meet where everybody runs.
Yeah.
So John set me up I had a paycheck. I had the van. School wasn't very expensive. It was very hard adapting to the heat. And again, I didn't train much that summer because I really didn't know where I was going. John was a big influence in my life. He was a father figure. He was only 36 or 37 when I got there.
Wow.
And he ran with us. He ran all the workouts with us. He didn't run the intervals, but John would do 10 milers with us.
Yeah. Well, how was it leaving your Edinboro team?
I wanted to stay. We didn't have scholarships. We had work study. Unbeknownst to me, I was on work study. So I never did anything. So our work study program went away. This is a true story. A lot of people don't know. And I'm trying to tread delicately there, but that's a fact. Doug had mentioned he'd find me a scholarship somewhere else well early in the indoor season. And when the end of the year came after North Dakota, when I almost beat, well, I didn't almost beat Steve Scott, but I had him. I was in front of him for a while. He came and said, sign the papers to come back next year. And I was just blown away that he hadn't found me another university to go to. To his benefit, I think he actually talked to some big schools. I know he talked to Penn State, and they didn't show any interest. But I definitely wanted to run D1, and here it was almost June, and I don't have a university to go to in the fall. I mean, Rich Bogarty and Dennis Packard helped me write a cover letter with a resume with my times. We sent it out to about 50 schools, and I got 4 full write offers off of that. So Arkansas was the one that was the most persistent, so that's why I went there.
What season did you first run after redshirting?
Fall 78. I was 18th at NCAAs in the snow. I was the 6th American in cross country in Madison. Solomon by Nyambui got second. I ran against Nyambui every weekend.
Wow.
I hated that guy. Not really, but he was at another level.
Yeah. When you got to the track, you had individual events, but D1 and the big meets there, 4x1 mile relay became something.
Yeah, I think we set a national record when I was there. I don't have the time, but I actually led that relay off in 4 flat. I ran a steeplechase the day before. Randy Johnson left me standing on top of a barrier before the water pit because he hurdled it at the 5th lap.
Right.
And so I'd never seen that before, and it was only my 3rd steeplechase. I had the pleasure to run against Randy in the lead-off leg the next morning, and I walked him. There was a little bit of revenge there. I think we ran, I can't remember our time, but it was in the teens, 16, 14, 16, 15, something like that. So that was great. I also beat Craig Virgin in the 2-mile indoors, and it was the 4th fastest indoor time in 1979 in 2 miles.
Wow. You know that time?
8:30.8.
Wow.
And I led off the distance medley the next morning with a 2:54.1200.
Wow. Where were you on the team? Say on that 4x1 national record. How close were you guys to each other?
Really close. My first year. My second year, there was some personality conflict. We took care of each other. I mean, we had a freshman named Frank O'Mara who ended up running, I think 13:12 for 5K and 3:50 in a mile. Still in touch with Frank a little bit. I'm still in touch with Mark Anderson from San Antonio and Pat Vaughn from Tulsa. In fact, we've talked probably twice this year already. That's pretty cool about runners is we tend to stick together and friends for life.
Yeah. I didn't know about your steeplechase adventures.
Oh, that was awesome.
The 800, 1,500 mile, and 2 miles were things you definitely put your name on the books with. What about those longer races? You definitely did some longer races. Did you get into longer races on the track ever?
I ran 5,000. I won the Southwest Conference in 13:51. The problem with John at Arkansas, there was a huge burnout fee. The week after I beat Virgin indoors and it was fresh, you'd think he'd be popping me in a mile somewhere in the country. Just go burn it. Let's rest. Let's do some repeat short intervals and go PR somewhere. He put about 110 miles on me, and we ran 3 interval workouts. And then I showed up to NCAA like the week later like a wet noodle.
Wow.
John just buried us with mileage. He told me the keys to success are 3: work, work, and more work. He was an animal. It wasn't until 4 or 5 years after I graduated that he started winning national titles because he cut back his mileage.
Interesting.
In his intervals.
Apart from the burden of the training, did you get injured?
Chronic Achilles tendonitis because we were always in spikes on the track.
Right.
We never missed races. Hit my trail leg twice in the 4 steeples. Won the first one. I got up and won after somersaulting onto the infield.
Yikes.
I got anemic my senior year, didn't know it. Blood testing in the 70s was non-existent. So, I mean, I showed up and ran 2 flat in an 800 one day, and John looked at me, looked at my eyes and said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "John, all I want to do is sleep." So he sent me up to the med center, and sure enough, I was anemic. We started pounding iron and vitamins, and that was before that Drake race, and that's why he didn't anchor me. He ran me first. But I was healthy then, and I ran 4 flat.
Huh. Do you mind if I ask about the anemia a little bit? How long did it take that iron treatments and vitamins till you felt normal again?
A couple, 3 weeks, generally. And that's what I found with my high school runners as well. About 3 weeks.
Well, let's get on to another area on the international circuit with the national cross country team. How did you get involved with that?
Totally by mistake. I just got off the indoor circuit. I'd run the Mason-Dixon Games. I won the Albuquerque 2 mile. I'd run several 2 miles. I ran an Albuquerque 2 mile at altitude in 8:49. I was running the Potts Fieldhouse at CU where I was living. I ran 4:06 in there. It's one of the worst tracks you've ever seen, plus at altitude. So I was doing a lot of indoor races, and I showed up to a 12K in Broomfield, Colorado, and I beat Herb Lindsay. I kicked Herb Lindsay down, and he's like, "Who are you?" And I said, "You know me. We ran at Drake." And she goes, "Yeah, are you going to the U.S. cross country trials next weekend?" I said, "What trials?" Herb called Nike that afternoon. I was a Nike-sponsored athlete. I got shoes, an occasional plane ticket, and Monday morning at FedEx, there was a plane ticket to Louisville for me to go to the U.S. cross country championships. They set me up with a host family. I was standing on the line, and a guy almost had the gun up, and I asked the guy next to me how far the race was and how many people make the team. And he said 9, 12 kilometers, 9. So I ran with the pack, and I stayed in 8th place the whole way, and I looked back at 9th spot, and there was a couple hundred yards, and with about a mile to go, I kicked it in, and I finished 5th.
Nice.
Then I was off to Europe. At that time, I was training so much. I had plantar fasciitis, I had Achilles tendonitis, and patellar tendonitis. So I met with a trainer, and going over to Europe, I hadn't run for 3 weeks, but I wasn't going to forego my trip. And Country Bumpkin, remember?
Right.
So I got a trip to Europe. I'm going. I wish that I hadn't met with that trainer and somebody had put me on just a lighter program, just so I could get through this. My roommate in Europe was Mark Muggleton. He held the 10,000 record for a while, 27-22. So Bruce Bickford was on that team. Dylan was on that team. Virgin, of course. That was a flash in the pan. I came home, started training again. I wanted to win the Boulder. So I trained like a maniac. I did a workout that was just one of those right about workouts. I couldn't walk after it the next day. I was never shy of putting the work in.
Right.
And I always thought the more you did, the better you got. I didn't learn that till many, many years after I retired from running. And I started coaching.
Let me just ask about the national cross country team. There's some big names on there, of course, accomplished runners. What was the environment like on a team there thrown together? Not everybody knew each other, I imagine.
That's one of my regrets. I wasn't close to anyone. I mean, I knew Craig, and Nina was my roommate, and I hang out with a couple of the guys, but I knew that I wasn't going to run very well because I hadn't trained. You know, hindsight 2020, I probably would have given my ticket to someone else, but I was 23 years old and I'm going to Europe. Spent 9 days in Madrid and 5 days in Milan. I had a fabulous time. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't run worth a shit.
Yeah. Well, that was pretty much the end of your running career, was it?
Pretty much. 4 years later, but like I said, I'd lost a big step.
You went into some duathlons?
I was a national amateur champ in the Coors Light duathlon.
Let me have you describe what that is. Not everybody knows what a duathlon is.
It's a run, bike, run event. It's a 30-kilometer bike ride race in the middle is sandwiched by 2 5Ks. So you run a 5K, you go into an exchange area, you get on your bike, you hammer for 30 kilometers, and you come off the bike and you run another 5K.
Well, you're obviously going to be one of the top runners in the duathlon at that championship. Where were you in the pack in the first 5K?
Oh, I was way out front.
Way out front. Okay.
Well, my strategy was to bury people on the first 5K.
Right.
Because I didn't transition very well. Changing your shoes.
Right.
I was also 40 years old.
Wow.
So
and this is not a master's event.
Actually, let me back up. I was 34 when that happened. I was working a full-time job as a rep for Pearl Izumi's cycling apparel and sandwiching 40 miles running and 100 miles riding a weekend with my 40-hour work week.
There's that work ethic.
Well, yeah. And living in Boulder, Colorado, which is known for its good times, I never regret living in Boulder. Boulder is just a fun place to be, particularly in the 80s.
You've had your career as a competitive athlete. You've got the duathlon. How did you move into coaching?
I knew that Monarch High School in Louisville, Colorado, which is outside of Boulder, and I still have a house there today, needed help with their distance runners. So I went and talked to the coach, and I was the distance runner assistant on the track team. They had another guy doing cross. But while I was there, I used a lot of my systems and formulas with a kid named Kirk Webb. Kirk went on to win the cross-country title as well as the mile and the 800, and he set a Colorado record in the 800 and 151. Wow. So we had some successes there, and then the head coaching job at Boulder for cross-country came available, and they hired me immediately. I never really had that one guy that was the animal to take you over the top. I had a lot of worker bees. In the 4 years I was there, I think we finished fourth in the 5A state twice and fifth another time. And then my 4x8 there got second in the state and set a school record. They were all worker bees, no rock stars, no Kirk Webbs.
What was your philosophy or personality as a coach?
Well, I was very open. I was a dictator. I said, you were going to do things my way, and you're going to cancel your Runner's World subscription right now. We're going to show up to practice every day. I have a pyramid formula where the first step in the pyramid is a foundation. So we ran easy miles, lots of them all summer, aerobic. Then we'd move into strength work where we'd throw some hill repeats and threshold runs and so on and so forth. Then we'd work into pace work. And the last couple of weeks before district and state, we cut the mileage in half. Probably did some hard strides every other day. So we were rested. Had good kids. It was challenging. I had 120 kids on the cross-country team.
Wow. Wow. That's kind of a dream.
Good kids.
Or a dream or nightmare. How is it managing that many kids?
Yeah, well, you've got your varsity, and then you have your JV, and then you've got your open race guys. I'm not a great high school coach from managing the high school politics and managing the parent politics. Hindsight 2020, I would have probably delegated some of those responsibilities to assistant coach and not had contact with parents or the administration unless they absolutely necessary.
How long did you have to work with Kirk Webb?
I worked with him from his sophomore year to his senior year.
Oh, perfect.
I mean, he ran 49 high in the 400, and he wanted to run the 2 mile once to set the school record. I think he ran it late in the season and ran 9:27. At altitude adjusted, that's about 9:10.
Nice.
And then he went to Penn and ran, and it was a different program. They had a lot of plyometrics. They saw Kirk's credentials, and they didn't realize he's from an aerobic-based program, and they buried him with speed and weights and plyometrics, and he ran okay. He didn't have any regrets going there. He got a degree in architecture. Nice. Smart kid. And then I think he went on to his master's. I talked to him over the holidays. He's getting married. We still stay in touch. That's one of the great rewards of coaching. You get to stay in touch with your athletes.
Yeah. Your identity shifting from a competitive athlete, how much did you talk about your personal experiences to the kids?
Oh, a lot. I had systems and formulas, and, we taught tactics. I mean, how to run corners and hills. One of the big things that I learned from Frank Shorter is that when you're running cross country, at the top of the hill, everybody else rests. Well, you take 3 hard, quick steps. And I used to tell the kids, you're going to drop everybody like a bad habit. And they would look at me like, I don't have any bad habits, Muggs. So my sense of humor didn't exactly equate, but kids that excelled loved the program. They listened. And that was a joy, both boys and girls. I had several girls finish top 5 in the state.
Nice.
Girls are harder to coach. They've got a lot more injuries, a lot more anemia. Boulder High, last I checked, was a top 50 high school in the United States. Wow. So their academic load was, they didn't go, you ask them what they're doing for fun on weekends, they'd say studying.
You're all into whatever you're doing there. Cross country or track, which was a better coaching experience apart from just achievements?
In the coaching world, I think they were both great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Nice.
I adored running cross country and I adored coaching it. But I look at myself, if I were to go back, as I was an 800-meter runner. Ran 149 and 0.8 at Arkansas and finished 4th in a race, and the writing was on the wall that you're not running the 800 much anymore unless they need you on a relay, and which I did from time to time. So I started focusing on the mile, and then I really focused on the 5,000. And I just never ran that really fast 5,000 because I never had my legs under me. John, you make Bowerman look like a short order cook at a restaurant. He buried people. I've run as much as 140 miles in a week, and I don't think anybody should ever do that.
Yeah. Right. Both knowing other people in that time that had that prescribed running and it kind of ended their careers early. How did you adjust, and when did you say, I'm done running? When you had that injury, how long did it take before you said, hey, this is it?
See, I qualified for 1,500 at 80 trials.
Right.
In 340.8, so I think the standard was about 2 seconds behind that. I didn't get to go because I was injured.
Right.
And then when I hurt my back from overtraining, the psoas muscle is deep inside your pelvis and connects to your lower vertebrae and goes through your pelvis and to your femur. No one even knew what a psoas muscle was in 1980.
Wow.
One was overworked and short, and the other one was underworked. So I had an imbalance in my back, and it hurt like hell to run. It took 3 or 4 years. I thought I could still qualify and potentially make the team in 84, but I hadn't run since 81. It wasn't from lack of trying, seeing chiropractors, osteopaths. I eventually got Rolfed, which is deep tissue separation therapy. That probably did the most benefit. But the Rolfer had a wife who was a patterning specialist that watched me walk. And she corrected some gait issues in my stride and gave me some exercise to strengthen weak muscles. That was 6 years after I was laid off.
Right.
Started running again. And I could win any 5K in Boulder. I was a shadow of what I was 6, 7 years earlier. So I never really got over it. I'm 66 now, but I still think like a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
I've had 2 hip replacements, primarily because of golf. I think running was very hard on it, but I think golf was harder. I compete a lot of golf. I'm a 9 handicap. Again, it's fun.
Right.
I never really got over it. I always thought I could be better.
Let's talk a little bit about your relationships with the people of the past and the schools. Did you get back to Edinboro after you left for Arkansas?
One time, Matt Sensiewicz was staying with me in Boulder. He was driving back to New York City, and I said, I have no money. I'll share the driving. Would you get me back somewhere close to Buffalo? I go home and see my mom. And he dropped me in the middle of the night at I-79. The intersection of, what's the other? Is it I-80? It would be I-80 and I-79.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh.
Northeast Pennsylvania.
And I hitchhiked up to Edinboro with a bright blue rain suit on so people could see me thumbing. And I went up to Edinboro and I crashed with some runners. Next day I hitchhiked up to see my parents. And it was a surprise visit. So I never really went back but 1 or 2 times.
Mm-hmm. That you mentioned you're in touch with a lot of the people from the 70s team there, both Edinboro athletes and, for example, Pete Lucas from Slippery Rock. What do you want to say about any of those guys, apart from their good friends? How much of those relationships has changed or been important to you over the years?
Well, I think I poured a pitcher of beer on Kevin Foley's head at a keg party when I was So we had a little bit of a fisticuff going on or something like that. Might have been punches thrown, but I really don't remember. But we've always been good friends since. I talk to Kevin all the time. He went on to coach for years and years. He just retired as a high school educator. Foster is up here in Wyoming raising cattle somewhere. He's got 2 big Pyrenees dogs. He said, don't bring your dog. My Pyrenees will kill him. So I talked to Foster. He's still as weird as ever. Dennis and I are in touch. Dennis and I used to hang out in the off season. Great guy. Pete Lucas said to me at that Shippensburg meet when the gun went up, he had lane 1, or I had lane 1, he had lane 2, and he elbowed me on the shoulder and said, what do you think of urban renewal? And the gun went off. And he laughed all the way around the curve. And if you ever heard Lucas laugh, it was really gregarious. And then he said, I'm messing with you, man. I'll take you through the first 3 laps. So he paced us through the first 3 laps, and then I won the race. I think Pete was second.
Yeah.
They're still close. He's a professor of anthropology at NYU now.
Nice. Jeff Foster maybe will agree to do this, I hope.
Well, don't count on it. I enjoy talking to you.
But he has an interesting story I just found out about. He didn't use up all his eligibility in his 20s.
He came back at 41 and made the varsity. Ran the ice.
That's going to be an interesting story. I hope we can get that. That's crazy thing.
People don't understand how good the NAIA can be. I mean, you know who won the title when I was a freshman in cross? Mike Boyd.
Right.
You'll never see me living on the East Coast. I mean, never say never, but I grew up there. I have great memories, but I love an arid climate and 300 sunny days a year. Even though we've had a little bit of a rough winter, generally the winters are very mild in the Front Range.
Well, let's dig into what all old people talk about just to get a little bit of an update on your health. With the hip replacements, are you able to golf?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, I'm on 9 handicap. I still ride. Most of my exercise, recreational. I'm going down to Louisiana next week. I had a dear friend who lost his wife recently, so I'm going to go hang out with him for a week. And he's going to put a hurt on me every day on the bicycle. I've got to get on the bike a couple of times this week, somehow, some way. It's going to be 46 degrees today, so I'm a bit of a wimp at those temperatures. I still ride and golf. I go to Planet Fitness, which is a gym nearby. I'm in there 3 days a week doing a 20-minute lifting. I stay active. I do some core. I do some yoga. It's all piecemeal, nothing like people say, well, you need to get the Apple Watch and it can track everything. You guys, I tracked everything for decades. Not doing that anymore. I'm going to go have as much fun as I can. And so my wife and I ride, and she's not real competitive, even though she was state champ in long jump in high school. We go ride to see the scenery. We saw a bald eagle the other day. We rode right under him on a tree branch. We see a lot of owls and hawks. I'd like to fish more. I always get a fishing license, and I never end up fishing. I've got a Kawasaki motorcycle in the garage and a Shelby Mustang, and I drive a Ford F-150. We have a good life. I've got a 90-pound female Labrador that's 10 years old. She's the love of my life. And I've got a 9-pound Chihuahua Terrier named Minnie Cooper. We've got a good family. As far as competing, maybe go down to the Y and shoot some hoops with the kids. That's about as far as I'm going to go.
It does sound like you're happy. You've got a great life. The turns that we all take and decisions influence us. Your early childhood trouble, the decisions you made, where you went, sounds like some great decisions that got you headed on a good path that makes you where you are today. Do you ever look back and think about sacrifices that you made? What did you miss out on or give up to be as competitive and successful as you were through all those years?
Nothing. I was a party animal all through college and afterwards, almost to my demise. The constant regret that I have that still shows up in the brain box, I can't change the past, but I wish I knew more about training and had a program, and it actually won that state title in New York. I actually wish that I had a B average in high school so I could have gone to someplace like Villanova or Oregon, Tennessee. I tried. Stan Huntsman called me and offered me a 25% ride when I left Edinboro. And I said, Coach, it's my dream university to go to. I'd go there in a heartbeat if you could help me out a little more. They had just won NCAAs in track. He offered me a quarter ride to come be a half miler there. And I'd love Knoxville. Probably wouldn't have graduated if I went to Knoxville. That's a fun town.
It's good to catch up. It's just nice talking to you. You're a good storyteller. You express yourself well. You seem to have such great personal insights into what was important to you, what is important to you. And it's great to reflect on the 1970s where we personally crossed paths, and so many other of the names that you mentioned were part of that. And I think a lot of people will enjoy hearing this, even people who didn't know you personally.
Well, thanks for having me. So, yeah, you can always look back, but, we're financially stable. We own a couple houses in Boulder County, Colorado that paid for. We have no debt. We've got a good life. What's next?
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.